More than 100 different drug crews roam the streets of D.C. Could have been a 4-man group, 10, 15, and more. 5th and O crew, 7th and Taylor, 12th and Hamlin, Hobart Stars, Naylor Road crew, 1512, Third World, E Street crew. A lot of moving parts, thousands of untold stories and forgotten victims. The details are 100% public. Every photo either came from a public source as well as a personal source that sent me photos. Let's get into it. Watching color TV used to be a privilege. The cable was sometimes bootleg, and relying on a TV guide was a must. In '91, they were showing joints like Teen Wolf, RoboCop, and Tales from the Crypt. We were living below the poverty line around Christmas time. Some of our mothers lined up in Northeast at a toy drive with the children. We got a chance to meet guys like Art Monk and Daryl Green, and other players from the Redskins too that were passing out toys, giving back to needy families.
I say happy birthday to Big Tony, y'all. Also, put out my man Southeast Father and President Reagan. Pump it! And little Tony and Peter and Big Brother Love.
The sounds of Red Essence Lock It was blasting. And it was a difficult time for anyone to be active, but the people kept on living and creating. As kids, we played outside. Older youngers went to the go-go's. We wasn't watching the rest of the world, but the world was for sure watching us and putting the spotlight on us. Essence was offered a deal with Andre Harrell. That turned into Lock It being featured on the movie Strictly Business. The next year, 1992, they dropped a tape with one of the biggest hits, Work the Walls. Landing at number 68 on the Billboard charts. We just painting the picture. A new generation was ushered in. Same time, neighborhoods around the city was a gold mine, and many of them was a fucking war zone.
The children at Kramer Junior High School in one of the worst drug areas in the city.
In this area, it's getting a lot worse. My friend just got shot the other day.
They worse.
Why do you say that?
It is. You can go to the corner right over there and it's like, give me a pack of coke.
Bennett noted the war on drugs is just getting started, while the dealers are established and well organized. Privately, his aides say it could take 25 years to make the nation's capital drug-free.
John DiLulio, American political scientist.
He's the one who popularized the term super predators in the early 90s, referring to juvenile violent crimes. And then Hillary Clinton ran with it publicly.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Crime is a lucrative business on both sides of the law. One hand washes the other. But no one benefits like the government, and they need crime to employ more. The answer always seemed to be more. More laws. More law enforcement, more prisons.
Man up for getting water! Local officials charge that Bennett's biggest problem has been his failure to relieve overcrowding in prisons, even though he had said building more jails was a top priority. Today, Bennett again promised to get new jails built.
Because we have finally gotten more police officers on the street. That was one of the goals that the president had.
The government always win in the end, and the people in the community take all the major losses. On this journey, I had the pleasure of speaking with many people from different walks of life, people connected to certain names. I talked to Shorty Pop Mother, Michael Frey's son, and even Panama, and what everyone have in common is losses, losing someone close to the streets.
Northeast, make some motherfucking noise! Two to the two, the 3, the 2, 1. I step out on my corner with my box of rocks. Drummer covers my hood from blocks and blocks. See my homie that I slang with. Hit him up with the deuce thumb thing shit. Back then it came with the love. Those niggas wasn't tripping over scratch. Cause we took turns and we both stacked stacks. And if you had a customer, you had it for life. Cause Brad the true hustler, Brad is right. Cause if we gonna stack cheese, then we gotta get along. And he who disagrees, then
One of the most violent parts of Northeast in the 90s was at least a mile-wide section on both sides of Benning Road. The Carver-Langston section on one side, and the Rosedale-Kingman Park neighborhoods on the other side, which includes Rosedale Street, 17th and Gales, 18th and D, East Street, and many in-between strips that had heavy traffic in a fairly new market. Money, drugs, females, BS conflict, all of it was a recipe for disaster. This story includes the Rosedale crew versus the C Street crew, the Wallace brothers, Stephen Moore, and at least 4 innocent victims, including a little girl. A neighborhood that took on a nickname so vicious it speaks for itself. All of this going on in one of the most majority black American historic areas in the city. Let's go further. Everything overlaps.
18th and D guys know 21st and I. 21st and I know Langston Terrace. Langston Terrace know guys from the Rosedale crew. Rosedale crew know guys from C Street, and C Street know 18th and D. Everything overlaps. Pamela Reed, 1994.
Last time around, we talked about the police chief losing his brother to violence, making him step down and retire. Then you had ex-mayor Marion Burry sent away to serve time over his drug addiction.
We knew he had problems.
And then in came a new mayor, born and raised in D.C., Mayor Sharon Pratt Kelly, coming into an already crisis, promising to reduce crime.
Kelly says at least 125 soldiers could be used right away to help with drug crackdowns, roadblocks, and in support roles for cops on the street.
The murders touched close to home even for her, when the son of her secretary was killed months prior in '92, all because of the war between two groups in the Rosedale and Lincoln Park neighborhoods.
Face one time.
Mike Lockhart and Cab Anderson grew up in an area near 15th and 8th Street Northeast. These two were young black men with solid foundations and a promising future. They hung out together in the neighborhood with other friends. Both of them went to Eastern Senior High School, which was the largest high school in the city at the time with more than 2,000 students in 1989. Ralph Neal was the principal back then. He used to patrol the streets at lunch period near the school with an officer present, dedicated to maintaining order. So, Eastern was considered one of the best managed high schools in the city. Cab was once captain of the football, basketball, track, and swim teams. And like most young folks, Mike and Cab both were full of life. After high school, Cab went further with his education. He went to college in Petersburg, Virginia, according to his mom. Mike, on the other hand, eventually ended up getting a teacher assistant job at Bowen Elementary. I'm sure that folks was proud of him, Cab being a senior in college and Mike working with children. Mike was now living on the south side, but would still return to the Lincoln Park area that he was familiar with to see friends. And some of those friends had beef. Law enforcement used the name the C Street Crew to identify some of the guys who was involved in what they called a large drug-scale operation. August 23rd, 1992, about 1 a.m., a young male was riding his bike near 17th and Rosedale Streets when he was targeted and shot in the back by members of the Rosedale crew. He was a friend of Mike and Cab, and this wasn't random. This is well documented. Mike and Cab got word of what happened and decided to go to DC General Hospital along with some other friends. The individual survived the shots, but Mike, Cab, and the other 3 friends was asked to leave by the feds. So they jumped into a red Ford Maverick and pulled off. Little did they know, some guys from the Rosedale crew would be waiting at the hospital hoping to catch some of the Lincoln Park guys. They followed them back to 15th Street, and then they let off shots, hitting several of the guys inside the vehicle. Mike and Cab both, unfortunately, perished in that situation. According to the Washington Post article, hundreds of people later on gathered at the church in Leadroit Park to pay their respects to Cab Anderson, a talented young man whose life was cut short. The mayor and police chief attended the funeral. This story became a high-profile case. Cab was called the hero because it was said that in the moment when the gunfire went off, he pushed a friend down, giving his life trying to save another. A young 22-year-old female friend spoke at his funeral stating, Cab wasn't into anything bad. He was just an average person living in D.C. He was doing well in college, trying to stay out of Dodge. At Mike's funeral, a letter from the mayor was read, and also some guys wore t-shirts that said, not drug related, and don't smoke the brothers. The principal at Anthony Bowen Elementary remembered Mike as the youngest person on his staff. Children looked up to him. Rest in peace. I walk a fine line, carefully selecting specific stories, not for the exploitation of it, but more like painting the picture, documenting what happened. And with special stories like this, it's about paying respect, because the thing is this, someone who goes to Easton High School who may come across this channel will know Mike and Cab existed. They went to my school. They lived in my neighborhood at one point. Now they'll be remembered in recent times by strangers. But let's continue. What is Kingman Park? One person writes, neighborhood of 21st to 15th Street somehow gets called Kingman Park now. However, when I moved to Kingman Park, that was Rosedale, and Kingman Park was primarily 21st Street to Oklahoma Ave. But from a technical standpoint, all of it is Kingman Park. Before there was a Rosedale crew, before the 80s, before the 70s, and even 60s, black families living in the Rosedale neighborhood, like other places, were kept from enjoying all of the privileges of the community. Right on Gale Street is the Rosedale Rec Center, and the Rosedale Playground that opened in 1913 was off limits to blacks, even the black kids living next door. As the black population grew, they organized in the late 1940s, demanding entry to the Rosedale Pool and Rec Center. In 1952, they finally desegregated the pool, allowing all people access. These are the photos, courtesy of DC Historic Sites, showing the young lady holding a sign that said, Rosedale Playground is America's shame. Yeah, see, one thing about foundational black Americans, we gonna band together and demand our rights. Shout out all the ancestors, all the FBA elders who walked the line, making sure they stood on business, had to get some straightening when dealing with that dominant society, man. After the integration, a lot of white folks abandoned Rosedale. Then, crazy enough, a lot of middle-class blacks ended up leaving later down the line, and what remained was the poor working class, mainly renters, in an area that became majority black with no public housing. To understand the Rosedale community in the early 90s, we could look at what the reporters said at that time. It was a mixture of decent-looking row homes and abandoned buildings, small homes and low-rise apartments. 3 out of 4 children live without their fathers. Drug dealers own several corners. Neighbors are too scared to confront them. The violence was among the city's highest. Conflict, drugs, violence, the streets, dominated by young men, claimed the lives of 25 people in an 18-month span in just an 8-block-long neighborhood. This was in the Rosedale and Kingman Park neighborhood. 11 of them had ties to the area. Times really changed, and it didn't happen overnight. The Rosedale community fight used to be against racism, unequal treatment, but they ultimately beat American blacks on a universal scale with drugs, welfare, and poverty. A year later, in 1995, the Rosedale neighborhood became the center stage for media as the Million Man March went down.
A national campaign to stop the violence, to stop the killing. Domestic killing doesn't make a difference. Beating on the women, it ain't gonna happen no more. Killing black brothers, it ain't gonna happen no more. We're tired of the killing. It's gonna stop, it will stop, and it must stop. I'm gonna let my brother from DC come up.
The Rosedale streets were deserted. They called 17th and Gales the heart of the community. Most of the residents went to the march or watched on TV, hoping for change. The reports about Rosedale stated, a few more fathers walked their children to school. A few men went back to church. A children's drill team at the Rosedale Church was created because of the march. People were trying to inspire the next generation of teens.
To all those who want to be called daddy,
Some of the residents would later express the actions of the people and the march didn't change nothing. On the other side of Bennett Road, the sentiments were the same. Only in regards to the violence, the history is a little different. You got public housing and apartments, the Langston Golf Course, created for black folks. Joe Louis used to go to that golf course regularly. Langston Terrace being the first federally funded housing project in the city, and then Carver Terrace came years later. Then they also had a movie theater called the Langston Theater near the golf course, opened in 1945, which brings us to something I thought was interesting. James Burry, who used to be a deputy director for C. Sosa, was once interviewed about his life growing up in D.C. in the 60s. And he mentioned Carver Terrace being a close-knit community with intact families in the 50s going into the 60s. But somewhere between 1965 and 1968, the neighborhood began to change. He said the Vietnam War was going on, and some of the soldiers came back to the neighborhood with heroin habits. People watched the transition in real time. The crazy coincidence is how James mentioned the effects from the Vietnam War and soldiers coming back to Carver Terrace from that same war hooked on heroin. And then many years later, the same neighborhood and the whole Carver-Langston general area take on nicknames like Little Vietnam and 21st in Vietnam. In the 5-year period from 1990 to 1995, at least 49 victims were killed in that area. Everything within that 21st and Maryland Avenue area was nothing to be slept on. No one is ever going to walk up on me and shoot me like that. A 13-year-old boy named Steve said this back when DC was the murder cap. His brother was just murdered, and it was said that young Steve started toting pistols after that. But those words, "No one is ever going to walk up on me and shoot me like that," I'm sure he meant that wholeheartedly, no question. Before his family settled around Carver Terrace, they lived at 1010 11th Street Northeast. Steve had ties with the Wallace brothers at one point. These guys shared their story publicly with reporters and had photos taken after going down for some bodies. But not Steve. He was different. When it came to the code of the streets, he made sure to honor that all the way to the end.
Stephen Moore was the youngest of 3 boys. He was exposed to the violent nature of Washington, D.C. very early in life.
In the article, one of the Wallace brothers said Steve used to hang out in the 1200 block of Wiley Street Northeast when he was just 12 years old. The reporter called Wiley Street a sidewalk drug market. It was said that Steve started hustling crack somewhere around the same time. Now let's take a look at Wiley Street in 1986. This is Wiley Street in 1986, 13th and Wiley. This is where one of the Wallace brothers said Steve was given 80 rocks of crack worth $20 each. That's 80 dubs. He got the bags from an older dealer who was going to a concert at the Capitol Center. So the youngest were the only ones out there with drugs, according to the article. They got the pumping and got all 80 joints off in about 3 hours. 80 dubs without being a penny short, which equals 1,600. So apparently this joint used to pump at one time, but at the Capitol Center, Essence was there, Junkyard, Stinky Dink. Steve was only like 12, allegedly. The older hustlers broke them off for $100 a piece. Again, this is according to one of the Wallace brothers who shared this info publicly with a reporter. Many of these streets and alleys were eventually flooded with crack users and dealers, lined up in the alleyways like a damn Jordan release, waiting to get that rock. Welcome to DC Raw and Uncut, a deep dive into the past, most controversial stories and time period. Fast forward later on in the late 90s, a community leader who worked alongside the cops and other neighbors named Vanessa Ruffin, who owned a house on Wiley Street, complained about the open-air drug market. So they had meetings about pushing back on crime, and later, her car was firebombed. And that supposedly came as a result of her neighborhood activism in 1999. All right, so this is 13th and Wiley right here. I'm gonna turn down. You can get a chance to see what it looked like now versus back in the day, 1986. This is where Steve and one of the Wallace brothers got their start. Years after Steve got his start on Wiley Street, he ended up at Oak Hill, a juvenile facility, sentenced to 3 months for peddling drugs. The family later settled in at 1104 21st Street Northeast, 21st and Vietnam. And then, not long after that, Steve's brother was murdered in the 2100 block of I Street, Northeast at 19. Then 3 years after his brother was murdered, Steve was charged with the murder of Michael Oliver. He was found face down with 7 bullets in him. This took place in the 21st and Vietnam area, about 100 feet from building 1104. Steve was just 16 at the time. Murder in the Vietnam area was common. Killers were able to hit a target, leave, change clothes, and come back to the same area later on as if nothing took place. People either looked the other way, minded their business, or some just flat out feared retaliation. But Steve was tried for the murder and acquitted with the help of one of the Wallace brothers, originally saying they didn't see nothing. But later on, he was tried again for first-degree murder of Michael Oliver. This time, his chances of beating it were slim. He wasn't even the only one the feds were putting pressure on. 21st and Vietnam was a war zone. Crews from I Street and others hanging in the 21st Street area were at odds. People were getting shot and shot at, and beefing bring the law, and they had the spotlight on the area investigating many people. The Wallace brothers went down, and the feds used their go-to play to try to get a conviction on Steve, if you know what I mean. It was a total of 4 dealers testifying, including one of the Wallace brothers. Still, the trial ended in a hung jury. 8 voted for conviction, 4 voted for acquittal, which resulted in a hung jury in February of 1997. He beat the same body a second time, but 2 months later in April, they took Steve to trial again for the 3rd time, charging him with the same murder. But once again, the jury was deadlocked. Even with the eyewitness testifying, 5 voted conviction and 7 voted acquittal. Now Steve was released after serving 31 months in jail. He was back on the streets. 20 years old, back in the mix, back around 21st in Vietnam. And inside of 6 months, Steve was shot in the back over an attempted robbery in the 900 block of 21st Street, October 97. He was then sent to D.C. General Hospital, and according to his mom, he was released the next day with a bullet left in his back. Because it was so close to his spine, the doctor didn't want to risk further permanent injury. There was no toning it down for young Steve. The day he was released, he was back on the block that same day walking with a cane, but not without the dog by his side. Taurus 38 revolver. Shells don't go nowhere. But the feds was watching, and he was in too deep. They caught him as he tried to limp away and tossed the joint, but he was caught and sentenced to 20 months to 5 years. Now fast forward to 2011, when he was obviously a free man and much older, 36 to be exact. He had escaped death, had been shot and escaped a murder conviction. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now it all finally caught up to him on the same block he hung on in the early 90s, the 1100 block of 21st Street. It was after 6 p.m., December 3rd, 2011. Steve was shot and killed. His time was called. But at one point when he was younger, he stated, "No man is ever going to walk up on me and shoot me like that." because it happened twice, but the last time was the final one. Someone more aggressive or just as aggressive is always right on the heels of the older men who still want to play street games. Shit get real around 21st and Vietnam. The same with Rosedale and all around this part of Benning Road, especially back when the city was the murder cap. Rest in peace to every victim mentioned in this video. This is not to speak down on them, it's to use these high profile situations to paint pictures. It's different when you see it back. And comment if you're familiar with any of this, if you currently or used to live in the area of 21st and Maryland Avenue, and if you remember when the neighborhoods first took on the nickname Vietnam. Oh yeah, and don't click off the video, check out the bonus content at the end of this video titled The Huck-A-Bucks.
Hold up, stop, pause, quit, change the pace. What now saying with me? We gon' kick it on stuff for Miss Gatlin, yo. Well, if you feel what I feel, you go, We say, take a step back. Who do you see?
So the Huck-A-Bucks formed back in the 90s, back when go-go was at the forefront of the culture locally. Just like I mentioned on the UCB video, we had a lot of up-and-coming bands during that period, and the Huck-A-Bucks used to open up for Junkyard at the Ibex nightclub, as well as Backyard and Essence, and they were sharp as hell musically, especially at the height of their career. They made several go-go hits that took off. They utilized sampling in the 90s, making catchy records. Members of the band included Lil Joey, Ricky, Ray Ray, Rob, D. Carlos, Lorenzo, Felix, and Saquon, who passed away. Rest in peace, Quan. He was a hell of a Congo and Rototom player. So Huck-A-Bucks released several projects, including a studio album titled Chronic Breakdown, released December 12, 1995, consisting of 12 tracks featuring Sexy Girl.
Sexy girl, sweet chill.
And we gonna get to that. It's two different versions. One titled Sexy Girl and the other one titled Sexy Girl Contest. Same song, just different sound. It was sampled on the Wale joint used for the 2006 record Breakdown.
You got that money, then break down.
Also on the Chronic Breakdown album is the song titled It's Time. This album was 67 minutes long and produced by Roy Battle. The Huck-A-Bucks also released another album recorded live at the Ibex nightclub, my favorite, with a total of 10 records. And this one was about 75 minutes and featured cover tracks like And then we have probably one of their most notable tracks ever, Classic, The Bud. I remember when this first hit the radio airwaves. The most catchy part was when it went into the changeover with the sample from the Budweiser commercial with the talking frogs.
Bud, fries, Bud,
Let's break it down. So originally, Super Bowl 29, 1995, was when the commercial aired, and it was later called one of the most iconic alcohol campaigns in advertising history, all because of the talking frogs. The Huck-A-Bucks sampled it, put it over a pocket beat, and it went like this. But also on the Huck-A-Bucks live tape was
yo, a T-bone. You're a sexy girl. All sweet ice is here. Can I rock your world? Yo, triple T. You're a sexy girl.
the Sexy Girl Contest record. Best version. And this was the one used for the Wale Breakdown record. This one was so clear. I mean, the quality was amazing. It was mixed very well. Hats off to the sound man. You could hear the rototom so clear and it didn't drown out the other instruments and vocals. So on the record, The Bud, the beginning of that track was a different feel with the tom standing out.
Take a step back. Who do you see?
and then they just mess your head up with the changeover and the buzz sample over that clean pocket beat. Just like that. Huck-A-Bucks was the epitome of a party band. Most of their records were fun, easy to vibe to, and all about expressing having a good time. So in '97, they released another album titled You Better Move Something, consisting of 10 tracks produced, engineered, and mixed by Roy Battle, man. Hey, shout out to Roy Battle, man. So with records like Gimme Those Rototoms, this was the last official studio album from Huck-A-Bucks. It seemed like they had all the talent in the world as far as go-go, but in comparison to some of the other traditional bands, their career and buzz was sort of short-lived. Was there issues with the band? Conflict? I'm not even sure, but the mark they left is stamped in DC history, stamped in go-go history, and you can't forget about their local hits and contribution to go-go.